All right, so we're diving into How to Lie with Statistics today.
Of classic.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's one of those books that I think everybody should read at some point, just to kind of
Yeah.
be aware of all the ways that data can be
Manipulated, yeah.
manipulated. And
Like learning to pick a lock.
yeah.
You know, a good person needs to know how to pick a lock so they can protect their own lock.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is all about protecting ourselves from being
Yeah.
misled or lied to.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting.
Yeah.
So many different ways that it can happen.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's insidious because numbers seem so
Yeah.
authoritative, right?
Right, exactly.
So you just sort of accept them.
Yeah, well, especially when you see a chart or a graph, people just
Oh, yeah.
they look at that and they go, "Oh, okay, well
That settles it.
that proves it." Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in.
Okay.
One of the first things that the book talks about is the sample with the built-in bias.
Right.
And they give the example of, this Time magazine article that said
Mm.
the average Yale man, class of 24, was making over $25,000 a year,
Huge money.
which, back then that was a lot of money.
Big money back then.
Yeah. So everybody's like, wow, look
That
at
was Yale guy.
how well those Yale guys are doing.
Right.
But what's the catch?
Well, the catch is how they got that number, right? I mean, it's like,
Right.
who did they poll?
Who was in that sample? Yeah. And so
Right.
they talk about, it was graduates whose addresses were known
Right?
and who answered a questionnaire.
Right. So think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
Who is not going to be answering a questionnaire about their salary? People who are embarrassed about it,
Yeah.
who are not doing well.
Right. Right.
Right. So right away, there's a built-in bias toward higher income people.
Yeah. And so you're saying that
Okay.
that number, $25,000, is inflated because it's not counting all those people. Absolutely.
Who maybe didn't do as well
Like
or
making $2,000-$3,000 a year.
right.
Right. And that's a huge difference.
Yeah, and maybe working as a,
Right.
a school teacher or something like that.
Exactly. Exactly.
So right off the bat, he starts out
Yeah.
talking about this
Yeah.
idea that, the sample.
You got to look at the sample.
Yeah, is the sample valid?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's so tough because when people
Yeah.
see statistics, they just think, oh, numbers.
Yeah, numbers are truth.
Numbers are truth, right?
And,
They don't think about who those numbers represent.
right,
Who's in that sample.
right.
And is that sample representative of what they're trying to, of the bigger
population.
population?
Yeah.
And that was the problem, if you remember, with that Literary Digest poll
Oh, yeah.
back in 1936.
Yeah, the one where they said Alf Landon was going to be president?
They said Alf Landon was going to beat
Franklin Roosevelt.
by a landslide.
By a landslide. And,
Look what happened.
what happened? Roosevelt won
Yeah.
by a landslide.
Huge landslide.
The opposite.
Yeah. So
What went wrong there?
I mean, they polled, what, like 10 million people or something like that?
They polled millions of people. I mean, this is back in the day when they could afford to do that.
Right.
Right. Telephone them, send them postcards.
Yeah.
But where did they get their names from?
Right.
Telephone directories
Yeah.
and magazine subscription lists.
Oh.
Okay, now this is 1936.
Right. Depression.
The Depression.
Yeah.
Okay. Who has telephones and magazine subscriptions during the Depression?
The wealthy.
The wealthy.
Yeah.
People who were doing well.
Yeah.
So right away, they had this built-in bias, and they're
Yeah.
thinking, oh, these people are probably more likely to vote Republican.
Right.
So we'll
Extrapolate that too.
extrapolate that to the entire country.
Yeah.
And it just
Backfired.
spectacularly.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great example because it shows that even if you have a huge sample size,
Right.
if it's not
representative,
right,
it's meaningless.
it's meaningless. Yeah. So you really have to pay attention
And
to
you have to look at that sample.
And
is it representative?
And so how do you get a truly representative?
Well, there are different ways to do it.
Yeah.
One is random sampling,
Okay.
but even that's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, how
random is random?
random is it? I mean, you think of pulling names out of a hat,
Right.
but there's a lot more to it than that.
Right. Yeah.
So there's that. There's stratified sampling where you try to make sure you have,
Mm-hmm.
the right proportion of men and women, different age groups, and so on.
Right. Right.
But even then, it's really hard
It's hard.
to get a truly representative sample.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much those biases can creep in.
Oh yeah, it's insidious.
Yeah, the book even gives this example of this survey where they asked Black people in a southern city
Right.
about their views on racial prejudice.
Yeah.
And depending on whether the interviewer was black or white,
Yeah.
it got completely different responses.
Oh,
and it's like,
which is so...
wait a minute.
It just shows how subtle this bias can be.
Yeah. Yeah. So how could that be? How could the interviewer's race affect, what they're saying?
If you are being interviewed by someone of a different race.
Right.
You might be more guarded. You might not be as willing to be as honest.
Right. Yeah.
Especially
with a sensitive topic like that.
Especially with a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just...
It makes you wonder how much you can trust.
Yeah. Any kind of data.
Whole survey data.
Survey data.
Yeah.
When something that subtle can make such a difference.
Yeah. And it's interesting because they give the specific example.
Yeah.
They ask the question about... if Japan conquered the U.S., do you think that black people would be treated better or worse?
Yeah. And the difference in the responses was?
Oh, it was huge.
It was enormous.
Yeah. It was like...
Just depending on whether the interviewer was black or white.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great example of how even seemingly small things can introduce bias into a sample.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things we really have to...
Yeah. And this is just one example.
Yeah.
This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
There's so many other ways that bias can creep in.
And so what's another example? What's another kind of bias that we...
Well, we'll get into some other ones.
Okay.
But this is a good place to start.
Okay, yeah, because it's really about the sample.
It's all about the sample.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The sample. You
got to look at that sample.
All right, so we've talked about the sample with the built-in bias.
Right.
What's another...
Well, another way to lie with statistics is to use the well-chosen average.
Okay. The well-chosen average. Now, what does that mean?
Well,
because we hear about averages all the time.
All the time.
And it seems
like it should be straightforward.
It should be straightforward, yeah.
Right.
But wait.
But it's not.
It's not.
Okay.
Because there are different kinds of averages.
Okay, so tell me about that.
All right, well, let me give you an example.
Okay.
Imagine you're looking to buy a house.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Sorry.
And the real estate agent says, oh, the average income in this neighborhood is $15,000 a year.
Okay, I'm feeling good about that.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah, so you buy a house there.
Right.
A year later,
you
get hit with a petition.
To lower the tax rate.
Okay.
Because it turns out the average income in the neighborhood is only $3,500 a year.
Wait a minute, what's going on here?
What happened?
Yeah.
Well, both of those figures are technically averages.
Right.
But they're different kinds of averages.
Okay.
One is the mean.
Okay.
And the other is the median.
Okay, so explain what those are.
Okay, so the mean is what most people think of when they hear average.
Okay.
You add up all the numbers.
Yeah.
And you divide by how many numbers there are.
Right. So in this case, you'd be adding up the incomes of all the people.
Right. All the families.
In the neighborhood. Okay.
And then divide by the number of families.
Okay.
So that gives you the mean.
Right.
But the mean can be really skewed by outliers.
Yeah.
So if you have one multimillionaire living in that neighborhood, their income is going to inflate the mean.
Right. Even if everybody else is making, much less.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's not really representative of the typical.
So what about the median?
The median is the middle number.
Okay.
So if you line up all the families in order...
By income.
Okay. The median is the one right in the middle.
Okay.
Half the families make more than that.
Right.
Half the families make less.
Okay.
So that often gives you a better sense of the typical income.
So in this case, the $3,500 figure was probably the median.
Right. Because it represents more accurately the typical family in that neighborhood.
Yeah. So the real estate agent chose to use the mean.
Well, of course.
Because it sounded better.
Right. They wanted to give you the impression that it was a wealthier neighborhood.
Yeah. And this happens all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
I mean, you see companies talking about their average salary.
Right.
But they don't tell you which average they're using.
So it could be the mean.
Right. So it could be skewed.
Right. And so you really have to dig deeper and figure out, okay, what kind of average are we talking about?
Exactly.
Is it the mean? Is it the median?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or is it even the mode?
The mode. What's the mode?
The mode is the most common.
Oh.
The most frequent.
Okay.
So, for example, if most of the houses in the neighborhood have 3 bedrooms, then 3 bedrooms is the mode.
Oh, okay.
Right. The most
interesting. So there's 3 different types of averages.
There you go.
Okay, and we need to know which one is being used.
Exactly.
Before we can...
Otherwise, you're getting a distorted picture.
Yeah. Make sense of the data.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the well-chosen average.
Right.
We got to watch out for that.
Absolutely.
All right, what's another one?
All right, well, let's talk about the little figures that are not there.
Okay, little figures that are not there. What does that mean?
Well, think about those ads that say things like,
yeah,
users report 23% fewer cavities.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those.
Okay.
And I'm like, wow, 23% fewer cavities.
You sign me up.
Yeah.
But the question is, 23% fewer cavities than what?
Right.
And how many people were in this study?
Okay.
Yeah. What was the sample size?
So you're saying that sometimes
those impressive sounding percentages are based on tiny, insignificant samples.
Right.
I mean, just because of random chance, you might get, a group of 12 people.
Right.
And for whatever reason, maybe 3 of them just happen to have fewer cavities.
Right.
And that's your 23%.
Right. And so then they go, oh, look.
There you go.
We've got this great new product.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's meaningless.
Right, because the sample size is too small.
The sample size is way too small.
Yeah. Yeah, and he talks about, trying that at home.
Yeah.
Flipping a coin.
Flip a coin.
And,
4 times.
Yeah.
You might get heads 3 times out of 4.
Right.
That doesn't mean that the odds are...
Yeah, that it's 75%.
75%.
Yeah, you need a much bigger sample size.
I need a much bigger sample size to get closer.
Yeah.
To have...
real...
Yeah, for it to be statistically significant.
Exactly.
So that's something...
And often, that's the information that's not there.
Right, they don't tell you what.
Right, they don't tell you.
The sample size is.
They don't tell you how.
Or how statistically significant it is.
How statistically significant the results are.
Yeah, and so that's something we really need to...
You've got to look for that.
Watch out for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's another example of...
Well, another example is when they give you the average.
Yeah.
But they don't tell you the range.
Okay, yeah, so like
Untraceable.
Like with the average family, right, like the average family.
Yeah, they say 3.6 people.
Right, 3.6 people.
What does that even mean, 3.6 people?
Right.
But it sounds very precise.
It sounds very precise.
Yeah.
But what's missing there is the range.
Right.
How many families actually have 3.6 people?
Yeah.
0. None.
Probably none.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you're saying we need to look for...
You need to look for the range.
The range. Okay, so...
Deviation from the average?
Yeah. Okay.
Is it
a very narrow range or is it a very wide range?
Right, because if it's a very wide range, that average
is practically meaningless.
It's practically meaningless. Yeah. And he gives the example, I think, of like...
Yeah. Well, and think about this.
Yeah.
This average family of 3.6 people led to the overbuilding of 2-bedroom houses.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Right.
Because I think, okay, 2 bedrooms, that's perfect for the average family.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course, there are plenty of families that need more bedrooms.
Yeah.
And plenty of families that don't need that many.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can have a misleading...
You can have a misleading average that leads to real-world...
Consequences. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he gives the example of like the Geis norms.
Right, the Geis norms for child development.
Yeah, and how those can really freak parents out.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it says, your child should be sitting up by this age and walking by this age. And if they're not, then...
There's something wrong.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but what's often missing...
What's missing is the range of what's considered normal.
Right. Because just like...
I mean, kids develop at different rates.
There's a range.
Right, just like with height.
Yeah.
Wait, it's the same thing with development.
What we need is...
And that range is often not provided.
The range,
Yeah.
Okay, so we got to look for that range.
Look for that range.
All right, so we've talked about the sample. We've talked about the well-chosen average.
The well-chosen average.
What's missing?
What's missing?
The range.
The range.
What else?
Well, there's plenty more.
Okay, we'll have to come back to
that. Come back.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
It is.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
It really does.
About all the ways that numbers can be used to mislead us.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Okay, well, we'll pick this up next time.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. You bet. All right, so we were talking about, all these ways that you can kind of lie with statistics.
Yeah, mislead people. Yeah.
Mislead people, yeah. And one of my favorites is this semi-attached figure.
The semi-attached figure?
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, it's basically like if you can't prove what you want to prove,
okay,
you prove something else.
Okay.
that sounds like it.
Okay.
And hope that nobody notices.
Sneaky, sneaky.
Sneaky, sneaky.
Okay, so give me an example
of
how that works.
Think about this.
Okay.
You see an ad for an antiseptic.
Okay.
And it says, kills germs.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, well, they show it killing germs in a test tube.
Okay.
But does that mean it's going to cure your cold?
Right. No, not necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
So it's like they're proving something.
Right.
But it's not really what they're...
It's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. So they're using that.
They're using this test tube as proof.
As proof that
it's effective.
Kills germs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But they're not actually saying it cures cold.
They're not saying that, no.
Yeah. Right. But they're implying it.
But they're hoping that you'll make that connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting.
And this happens all the time.
Yeah. And he gets
you see this with like polls.
Okay.
You know, they ask a question in a poll.
Right.
But it's not really the question.
Okay.
They're trying to answer.
Okay.
So, for example, they might ask, do black people have as good a chance as white people to get a job?
Right. Okay, well.
Seems like a straightforward.
It seems straightforward.
Yeah.
But what they found was that people who were prejudiced against black people were more likely to say yes.
Oh, interesting.
So if prejudice increases over time, you're going to see more and more people saying yes to that question.
But it doesn't mean
that things are getting better.
No.
Right. It just means the people answering the poll are more prejudiced.
Oh, that is so sneaky.
It's very sneaky.
Yeah, so you really have to pay attention to...
You've got to look at...
how the question is worded.
The question is worded. And what it's really getting at.
Yeah, because it might not be what it seems on the surface.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's advertising.
Oh, advertising is full of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Give me an example.
All right, well, you see those ads for juicers.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So they say extracts, 26% more juice.
Okay, 26% more juice. That sounds
fantastic.
Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah.
But 26% more juice than
water. Right, yeah.
Right. Are they comparing it to an old-fashioned hand reamer?
Right, yeah. Or are they comparing it to
another electric juicer that's on the market?
Yeah, so they're being intentionally vague.
They're intentionally vague.
Yeah.
About...
So it sounds impressive. Yeah, about what they're comparing it to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you really have to...
dig deeper and
find out.
Yeah, ask the right questions.
What are they comparing it to?
Yeah.
What's the baseline? Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the semi-attached figure.
That's the semi-attached figure.
All about proving something. That's not really...
that's related to what you're actually trying to prove.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
All right, what else we got?
Well, let's talk about one of the most common fallacies.
Okay.
It's called post hoc rides again.
Post hoc? Now, what's that?
Well, it's basically the idea that just because B follows A, that A caused B.
Right. So correlation does not equal causation.
Correlation does not equal causation. Exactly.
Okay,
let me give you an example.
They did a study.
Yeah.
And they found that cigarette smokers got lower college grades.
Okay, so they're saying non-smoke.
Smoking causes bad grades.
Right. But is that really true?
Right. Maybe it's the other way around.
Maybe it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Maybe people who get bad grades are more stressed.
Yeah, and they start smoking to relieve the stress.
Right. Or maybe there's a third factor.
Right. Some other underlying cause.
Right. Maybe there's some personality trait that makes people both more likely to smoke and more likely to get bad grades.
Interesting.
So you can't just assume...
So just because...
you have one thing causes another.
Yeah, they happen together.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean one caused the other.
Exactly. You've got to look for all the other possible explanations.
Yeah.
And the book gives this great example. Yeah. They found a strong correlation between the salaries of Presbyterian ministers in Massachusetts.
And the price of rum in Havana.
Wait a minute. What?
Yeah. So does that mean...
those ministers are using their...
those ministers are...
salaries to buy rum.
Spending all their money on rum.
Yeah.
Of course not. Right.
Right.
It's just a coincidence.
Yeah, a spurious correlation.
It's a spurious correlation.
Yeah, that's a great example.
So just because two things are correlated...
yeah.
doesn't mean there's a causal relationship.
Okay, that's good to remember.
It's good to remember.
So we've talked about the semi-attached figure.
Right.
And we've talked about post hoc.
Post hoc rides again.
Post hoc rides again.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, let's talk about how to actually statisticulate.
Okay, how to statisticulate. Now that sounds
that's
like a how-to guide for.
That's the art of misleading with statistics.
Okay, so give me some of the the tips, the tricks.
First of all, it's not always intentional.
Okay.
Sometimes it's just incompetence.
Yep. Right. But still misleading.
But it's still misleading.
Yeah.
Right.
So what are some of the ways?
All right, well, remember that map?
Oh, yeah, where they talked about
the one where they shaded in the States.
The darkening shadow.
Darkening shadow, yeah.
Yeah, to make it look like the federal budget was much bigger.
Yeah, just by shading in those sparsely populated states.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they were doing that back in the 30s.
And they're still doing it today.
It's
crazy.
I know. So that's one way.
Okay.
And then you've got, simple things like average family income.
Right.
Well, what kind of average are they using?
Right, yeah.
Are they using the mean?
Yeah.
Are they using the median?
Yeah, are they?
What are they assuming about family size?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so many assumptions.
So many assumptions baked in there.
Yeah. And then you've got things like decimals and percentages.
Okay.
Giving you this illusion of precision.
Right, making it sound very scientific and accurate.
Very scientific and accurate.
Yeah.
When in fact, it may not be.
Yeah.
At all.
Right.
And then you've got...
Percentages are tricky.
Percentages are very tricky.
Yeah.
Because you can play all kinds of games.
Yeah.
With them.
Yeah, you can use different bases.
Different time periods.
Yeah. Yeah, percentage points versus percentages.
Oh, yeah, percentage points.
That's always
points. Always.
Versus percentages.
Confusing.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if...
Give me an example.
Yeah, if profits go up 3 percentage points.
Okay.
You could say that's a 100% increase.
Right, if they were only 3.
If they started...
To begin with.
At 3%.
Ah, that's so sneaky.
It is sneaky, isn't it?
Yeah. So there are all kinds of ways to manipulate these things.
What's takeaway? What are we supposed to do about it?
But what are we supposed to do about it?
Yeah.
Well, the book gives us some good advice.
Okay, give it to me.
It gives us 5 questions to ask whenever we encounter a statistic.
Hit me.
Okay, first question. Who says so?
Okay, who's saying this?
Who's saying this?
Okay.
What's their agenda?
What's their agenda? Yeah. What's their bias?
What is their bias?
Okay, number 2?
Number 2. How do they know?
How do they know?
Yeah. What's the sample?
Okay, right. Back to the sample.
Back to the sample.
Yeah.
Right. Is it representative?
Yeah.
Is it big enough?
Yep.
Okay, question number 3.
Yeah.
What's missing?
What's missing?
What information are they not giving us?
What are they not telling us? Yeah. Okay, number 4.
Number 4. Did somebody change the subject?
Okay.
In other words...
What does that mean?
Are they presenting data that doesn't really support their conclusion?
Okay, so they're drawing conclusions that don't...
Shifting gears.
Yeah, that the data doesn't actually support.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And finally, question number 5.
Yeah.
And this is the most important one.
Okay, lay it on me.
Does it make sense?
Does it make sense?
Yeah. Does it pass the smell test?
Okay, so use your common sense.
Use your common sense.
Yeah.
If it sounds too good to be true...
Yeah.
It probably is.
If it sounds outrageous.
Yeah, if it sounds outrageous.
It probably is.
It probably is.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, so those are the 5 questions.
Those are good questions.
You've got to ask.
Yeah.
Whenever you encounter a statistic.
All right, so we've got...
And if you ask those questions, you're going to be a lot less likely to be fooled.
We've got our 5 questions to ask. We've got a lot of different...
I got a lot of different...
Kinds of statistical tracks to watch out for.
Yeah. And that's just the beginning.
Yeah.
There are many more.
Yeah. This is really fascinating stuff.
It is. It
really makes you think.
Yeah, it makes you question everything.
Yeah, question everything you see.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to numbers.
Okay.
All right.
Well, we're going to take a break here.
Okay.
And we'll come back.
Sounds good.
And talk about more of these.
More statistical traps.
Yeah. All right.
So we've covered a lot of ground.
We have, yeah. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's so important to be aware of these statistical tricks.
Because once you see them, you start seeing them everywhere.
You do. It's like you can't unsee it.
Yeah. And it can be a little disheartening, It
can be.
Yeah, because you start to realize how much people are trying to manipulate you.
Absolutely.
And it's not just, advertisers and politicians.
Right. It's everywhere.
Yeah. It's in, news articles.
Yeah.
It's in scientific studies.
Yeah.
You know?
It's even, like you were saying earlier, in our personal lives.
Absolutely.
You know, when we're comparing ourselves to others.
Yeah. It's like we're constantly being bombarded with statistics.
And so how do we protect ourselves? I mean, obviously, we've talked about the 5 questions.
The 5 questions are a good start.
Yeah. Who says so?
Yeah.
How do they know?
Yeah.
What's missing?
What's missing?
Did somebody change the subject?
Does
it make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Those are really good.
Those are good questions. Yeah, to ask.
Yeah.
But beyond that, what else can we do?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be aware.
Okay.
To be skeptical.
Yeah. To not just accept things at face value.
So don't be afraid to question the numbers.
Question the numbers.
Yeah.
Look for the hidden agenda.
Right, because often there is one.
Often there is.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that I've learned from reading this book is that it's so easy to be misled.
It is.
Yeah.
Because we want to believe.
Right.
We want to believe.
We want simple answers.
We want simple answers.
Yeah.
We want easy solutions.
Yeah, and statistics can seem to provide that.
They can seem to provide that.
Yeah, but often it's a false promise.
A false promise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, going forward, I'm gonna be a lot more careful about the statistics that I see and hear.
Yeah. And
ask those questions.
Once you start asking those questions, you can't stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like
it
changes the way you see the world.
It changes the way you see the world. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing.
I think so too.
Yeah. So hopefully our listeners will
benefit from this conversation.
Yeah, and be a little more skeptical. Don't be a statistic.
Don't be a statistic.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's our deep dive into how to lie with statistics.
A classic.
A classic, yeah. And I think it's one of those books that really stands the test of time.
It does. It does.
Because the problems that it talks about were still with us today.
Oh, yeah, more than ever.
Yeah, more than ever. So I think, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it.
Absolutely.
And if you have read it, it's probably time for a reread.
It's a good refresher.
Yeah, a good refresher.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.